Well, I'm rather more practical. In theory, everything sounds fantastic. In practice, what actually happens in the fashion industry in order to efficiently tackle consumerism or issues of illegal labor, like the illegal trafficking of human beings? So I will start with Simone, that as a chair of the UN Alliance on Sustainable Fashion, sets some standards. So in practice, we're talking about leadership, green or regenerative or sustainable. But in practice, what these would mean in practical steps that could actually bring change and bolster collective efforts in a measurable, solid way.
First thing is to do due diligence well and to assess all the sustainability risks in terms of environment, in terms of society, labor, and all the rest. Because this allows assessing the risks and then undertaking action and measuring the results of this action, which then must be communicated in corporate sustainability report. That's a step that due diligence, not only the one mandated by European regulations, by GRI, when you have to do the sustainability report, but due diligence as a normal practice in sustainability. It requires a continuous work of due diligence. Secondly, it's about getting back to basics. There are a few points on which everybody is bound to be perfect. One is international labor law, is the human rights discipline. This is embedded in the legislation of all countries, especially of the main countries where a big fashion, top fashion is produced. So there is no excuse to have any violation of international labor law, which is violation of the fundamental rights and principles at work. This has to disappear, full stop. There is not even thing to measure. There must not be. There is no excuse on that. There is a legislative framework that is very clear. There is an international framework that is very clear. There are the tools, no way. If there is exploitation, it's because of the business model. Because this business model is a business model tuned on shareholder capitalism, so generating shareholder value, while the transition that the speakers before me mentioned is also towards a stakeholder form of capitalism, where we generate value also for stakeholders, but this is too long, I'm not going to enter that. The other point is the cutting of emissions. Measuring how emissions are cut, scope 3 emissions in the supply chain. That's something feasible. We need to do more. We know we need to cut them 50% by 2030. What do we do? How we do it? Science-based target to report, science-based target kind of measuring and reporting so that we are all aligned and we understand that well. The other point is to work in the whole supply chain with all suppliers. But I shut up, I spoke too much.
Yes.
You're a force of nature.
Not at all. Pavlina.
Regarding the supply chain, which is a massive topic and is where all the crimes happen, from illegal trafficking of human beings, and you very well know, George. So in practical terms, how we can tackle...
I'm a bit more cynical than Simone, equally as passionate. I think, to quote Sir Humphrey, yes and no. Yes, we could have leadership theoretically, and it is clear, like Simone says, and everybody has signed it. I think one country signed it thrice to end trafficking, modern slavery. So it's also ingrained in the culture. But the reality is, whether it's 35 million people, my figure says 75, 170 million in child labor. Again, we can contest the figures, but the amounts are exorbitant. US $2 per day for a child in Bangladesh. We all know the figures. What ends up happening, though, 10% of carbon emissions just from shipping, because I want something now, I press the button, you know, no delayed gratification immediately, let's purchase something, and we expect it to be shipped.
So essentially, then, there's no accountability
No,
unless you get someone at the consumer end
who
actually gets a reputational. For example, Nike, if they are getting stuff which has come from child labor, and people protest to Nike, then it has an impact.
Not really. The next cycle of news is going to come, and they're going to pay a fine. So not really.
But they have switched suppliers, or
if I may finish, is that governments fail, companies fail, NGOs fail. So we have all this happening, and concurrently we all fail holistically, unfortunately. And the numbers are just mind-boggling. So there's also a banality of evil. I'm going to borrow this term from Hannah Arendt, with this continuous awareness and numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers. And here we are again. It's close to 2030, UN agenda, eradicate trafficking, eradicate child labor. I don't think we're that close. So if we can start being a bit more realistic and saying, let's combat and curtail, let's try to change the culture a bit, let's vet NGOs whose raison d'etre is financing, hence the moral panic, give us money, everything's going to, hell in a handbasket. So we need to also change the cultures and be also accountable. We can't just blame consumers, we can't just blame companies. Companies, for instance, we use this term, I'm sure it's been used a plethora of times at this conference, at the summit, supply chains. I think that's a misnomer. When you have companies, fast-moving good companies with 180 countries where they're represented, it's a nebulous cloud of subcontractors, part-time suppliers. There is a lot of plausible deniability in these companies. Will hire third parties to actually hire labor for them, child labor for them, and they say, well, we had no clue, we hadn't the foggiest. Yeah. The third party hired all these children. We are appalled. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, all the suppliers were part of the supply chain. Chryssi, from your experience, you're talking about regenerative leadership, so in theory sounds mind-boggling. In practice, what it would mean in terms of tackling over-consumerism and bolstering collective efforts, bringing together, connecting diverse stakeholders in order to face the challenges and respond to the challenges, but really in an impactful, solid manner, one step at a time. But this step had to be the step.
I think I will start by agreeing with Simone, who actually said earlier, exploitation takes place because of the business model. And somebody who is a academic, I've been in industry now that I've joined academia, and I see as a duty to try to actually change business models. And regenerative leadership offers that holistic approach. I mean, it's not just a theoretical concept. I can give you a great example, Patagonia. Yeah. Patagonia has taken regenerative leadership to the next level. It's a US fashion brand, and now they have actually changed their legal status so that any profit that is generated, it goes automatically to sustainability causes.
But that was the idea of one incredible guy.
Amazing regenerative leader.
My question, I know that Pavlina will ask the same question, but I mean, Patagonia is the exception.
Exactly.
Why, I mean, if it's such a great model, and I think it is a terrific re-engineering of the model, I mean, why hasn't it been replicated?
Well, it only took place a couple of years ago, actually. It's very, very recent, and we need... Yeah, but Patagonia has actually been there for quite a long time. I mean, he changed the legal thing only a couple of years ago. Yes, and also if you read the company's opening statement, they've tried sustainability in different ways, and there were initiatives that failed. So they never claimed, Patagonia never claimed that they were the best practice, and the leaders in tackling sustainability. I think for me, it's a process of change. Like regenerative leadership is the next step from sustainable leadership in the same way that, we started talking about sustainability, then we moved into circularity, and now we're moving into regeneration. It's not an automatic process.
Just since I deferred my time, if I may interject, if you have responsibility without authority, you will fail. If you lack legitimacy, you'll fail. So you might have well-intentioned leaders. How can, when governments with so much effort, so many USDGs, everything, fail to police trafficking in supply chains, why would a company, even a well-intentioned company with proper, thoughtful, humane leadership, manage? They don't have the knowledge in their chief legal officers, they don't have the incentives, and just blaming the business model when NGOs fail, when governments fail, I think is a bit facile. I think it's a holistic mirror we have to kind of look into and take responsibility at every step, even as consumers. If my niece wears a t-shirt saying I'm a feminist, but she bought it for €3, perhaps a girl somewhere being raped and being fed dog food is also. So the banality of evil is not just in the sense of, again, awareness, again, numbers, again, but also of the perpetrators. But we shouldn't, like Lady May unfortunately used to say, call them evil people. They're the person next door feeding the lady who works for them dog food. They're the mom and pop shop they're artisans and they make artisanal clothes and they have children working for them. So the banality of evil is also evil in these perpetrators, but in the sense that they're banal, they're boring, much like Eichmann. So how do you understand them? And I finish with this. You understand them by realizing that whether it's a huge company with 180 subsidiaries or a mom and pop shop, they want low risk and high profit. And once you understand this, once you fathom this, you can attack both by forfeitures and by also better partnerships, which I'll talk to hopefully during the next question.
Sorry, but I need to intervene. We all agree, and also with George, but there's a point. Responsibility is individual. It has to be associated to a person, legal, juridical person, or physical person, whatever. And the law exists because responsibility is individual. So if there is violation of human rights law and therefore of labor legislation in a supply chain, the responsibility is with the company that violates that directly, but also with the company at the head of the supply chain. As this is the ratio, the logic of the new European legislation, of the forthcoming legislation on forced labor all over the world, and so on. So we must not lose of sight the fact that the most powerful wall against these things is the rule of law. Is the rule of law. The world of today is in shambles because we do not believe in the rule of law anymore. In the specific case, in the rule of international law. We see what is going on in the Middle East.
Yeah.
The rule of law is the only wall against it, and individual responsibility. We are all responsible and we can speak philosophically, and I agree with you, and it's very beautiful, but that's a legal responsibility, and that's the first step to get these things to stop, to get people accountable. And the people accountable are those who profit directly as a company of this kind of practices. Full stop.
Simone, I absolutely agree with you. But I think the problem is I also agree with George, which in a sense is a sort of a verdict of despair. What can one do? Because actually people are not being held to account.
I was not speaking against George.
No. I concur with Simone. I just
I know you should, but how often are people held to account? They're not.
They're not.
Pavlina.
And also, I would say, it's a question to Simone primarily, as he represents an international organization who sets standards. Would you say that companies overall, not just the fashion industry, but fashion industry is massive, pay too much attention on corporate sustainability, on ESG reporting, rather than the essence, the progress of what it leads to the reporting prior to the reporting? So to me, it seems rather like a foggy terrain. So we have the reporting that pretty much sets everything in order, and it's more of a tick in the box process the way I see it, rather than essence. So we somehow need in the reporting, but...
Very good point, yeah.
I'm sorry, I disagree. I disagree for a point. Yes, you're right, Pavlina. This has been the rule for a long while, and we have a lot of sustainability reporting, which is greenwashing or which is willful thinking or creative writing. But the present legislative change at the level of the European Union, at the international level, is curbing on this and is forcing everybody to do corporate sustainability reporting in a very clear way that shows what is really done. Let us not forget that there is the European taxonomy.
Yes.
The European Union has created the taxonomy that says how I can use the word sustainable. If I say I am sustainable, I have to substantiate in a bloody good way. So the time of creative writing, which exists, Pavlina, you are right, is going to an end. And this, as George said, George of Georges, I don't know how to pronounce your name.
No, George.
I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. But I'm very conscious of the time.
Yes.
Now, I think everybody here is actually slightly hungry, perhaps.
Yes.
And it says on my program that we're supposed to have our lunch at 10 minutes past 3. It's now 25 past 3. So I'm going to just see if there are any questions. I'm going to make sure that this is finished completely at 3:30. I don't know what time that will be in Geneva, but no,
we were late in starting, so.
So, any questions from the audience? Yes, lady there. And it has to be a brief question, because there's going to be very brief answers. And a question, not a comment.
It has to be a question.
Hello there.
Sorry, I keep saying lady, and
I don't know. I'm gonna take a haircut straight away after this event. I'm not gonna lie. I've had enough, you know.
It's the lights.
Gender fluidity.
No, I'm done. I'm gonna go to my question. So thank you. Thank you. So regarding to what Ms. Marr said and all the statistics that you mentioned about the figures about the situations about the labors of young children in fast fashion. I actually watched a documentary recently that outlined all that. Now my question is this, because I was trying to think about it when I was watching the documentary and now listening to your ideas. So how can you combine the psychological elements in fashion, in fast fashion, so companies can be sustainable, but at the same time create a product that's sufficient, that's people want it, and it's also financially viable. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think Chryssi.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
The question was to Marr.
Okay.
I don't mind who answers, but there's a business model as well.
I think what you're actually, my immediate response is that this is a wicked problem. And what we mean in design terms about a wicked problem is because they're not sort of like an easy answer and solution. I think what's happening nowadays and what we can see more and more from those dimensions that you have highlighted, especially companies who are engaged in fast fashion, they are very much, one determinant factor is their brand identity. And this is where consumer power is really, really instrumental to actually lobby the likes of the H&M and Zara to actually change their practices when it comes to supply chain processes.
And maybe just to add, in terms of education, I think, we talked about humble leadership. I'm also thinking about humble designers. We teach intercultural communication. We work with actually makers in different countries so that we're not Eurocentric, that we're looking beyond where we are and actually amplifying different voices, which I personally think for our students, but for us as a whole is really, really important, so that we look beyond our own kind of bubble and actually reach out.
And really quickly, as far as demand, because we have to also look at demand and then consumers. When they asked organized crime boss from Mexico, why do you do this to the US and you import cocaine? He said, you like your cocaine so much. It's a you problem, it's not a me problem. I'm just facilitating. So there will always be organized crime groups who detect this denied demand, even if we do institute the rule of law that I concur 100% with Simone. But organized crime groups, through corruption, through human nature, through all our vices, they find a way to satisfy this denied demand, whether it's a kidney, eyes, cheap clothes that are not CE certified, copies. This is 300 billion around for trafficking, around 300 billion for counterfeit goods. What's our budget fighting it? Is it 1.2 trillion? It's not. So we have to be realistic again.
Thank you very much. It is 15:29.
And the chicken is growing cold.
And the chicken is there. So I'm going to thank Simone. Mille grazie.
Ciao, Simone.
Ciao, Simone.
Ciao, Simone.
And thank you very much, George. Thank you, Pavlina, for everything. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Chryssi. And thank you to the audience. I'm going to just say thank you to the audience, because you've asked lots of good questions. I'm sorry if I misgendering either.